Okay, let's talk about Rockefeller. Let's just pull it from the notes typewriter over here. John D Rockefeller, born in 1839, died in 1937, founder of Standard Oil. He founded the General Education Board and had an undeniable influence on American culture. And now, of course, Standard Oil would go along to hold its influence in the, mid-1900s when Ford was creating his affordable motor vehicles. Affordable Oh, please laugh. And around that same time, the circumstances allowed Ford to create, his automobile. Involved a trust being broken by the people who held the patent for the automobile, who kind of held a monopoly on it. And the courts were just kind of into like, going down monopolies with a really big stick, and they're just rich piñatas. Okay. And so when the courts broke up Rockefeller's Trust, it broke it up into 36 different small companies, which included Standard Oil, which began producing petroleum fuel products for automobiles. So John D Rockefeller started work young. He had a father who was a snake oil salesman, or a con, a criminal. And so to help support the family after his father left, John took up a job, and he was stuck in the same dead-end job for years until he had an epiphany that he could turn it all around by investing in a new way to distill kerosene. A more affordable way and a safer way, because kerosene products were notoriously quickly produced, and an issue where they were volatile. It was like having a time bomb in your house for a ceiling light, except it was usually on a table and not a bomb. Point is, they're volatile. They would go like, "Oh, I'm gonna light my light." Whole family's dead. Yeah, which is rough, because you just wanted to read, the paper. I'll see you guys when I come back around, I swear. Oh, this is awkward. There we go. Hi there. Okay. So there were several key influences in John D. Rockefeller's life. A big one, who just kind of helped him get a start, was Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt was a railroad mogul. He basically controlled half the country in transport. He had the only bridge into New York City, which he closed because somebody made him angry. He was not a man to mess with. Vanderbilt saw the potential of shipping oil on the railroads and began looking at small-time oil manufacturers, kerosene manufacturers. Sorry, it's been a long day. Began looking at small-time kerosene I'm gonna cut that out so much in post-production tomorrow. We began looking at small-time kerosene manufacturers, and just kind of shopping around for who would be able to get the best product for the lowest rate. He called John D. Rockefeller to a meeting at his estate. Rockefeller's just running late that morning. He misses his train. A little bit farther down the tracks, the train's derailed. Everybody dies. Except John D. Rockefeller. So this turns John D Rockefeller around. He's now just, he believes he has this divine blessing that he's going to do something worthwhile, and that's why he was saved. And so John D Rockefeller, he reschedules his meeting. They meet. He's not meeting with the John D Rockefeller who wasn't, backed by God. He's meeting with the Rockefeller who is backed by God. And listen, he's gonna get what he wants. So they meet. They come to an agreement. Rockefeller has an exclusive. Make a note of that. It becomes very important later because Rockefeller is like a total They have an exclusive business contract to ship Standard Oil companies kerosene products on Vanderbilt's railroads. Now, it's starting to sound a lot like the game Monopoly. There's a reason for that. Just keep listening. Okay, so things are going really well. Rockefeller makes a promise he can't keep because he can't produce enough barrels to meet Vanderbilt's supply. Because Rockefeller can't produce enough barrels to meet Vanderbilt's demand. So he has to up production. He's spending a lot of money. He's making a lot of money. A little bit of time goes by. He realizes he's making too much oil. He's got so much left over. He's not making as much money as he could. So he goes behind Vanderbilt's back and talks to Mr. Scott. And he's like, "Oh, Mr. Scott, I think we need to ship my oil on your railroads." And Mr. Scott, who owns the other half of the country, is like, "No, Mr. Rockefeller, don't you have an agreement with Mr. Vanderbilt?" And Mr. Rockefeller's like, "Yeah, but money." And so Mr. Scott, of course, is like, "I'll have my secretary sign or write up the papers. I'll have my lawyers write up the contract." And Mr. Rockefeller, of course, because he's trying to be sneaky, is like, "I think a verbal contract will do fine." And at this point, this is kind of where, in this origin story, where the Nemesis is introduced. Although in this case, he's more of an anti-hero. But our protagonist here is kind of the bad guy. If you wanted a good guy, watch a video about Ford. Except for the part of it where he's super anti-Semitic. If you ignore that part, Anyway, so Carnegie's like, "Oh, he's conducting shady business. Maybe we should tell Vanderbilt." And Mr. Rockefeller's left at this point, and Mr. Scott's like, "Yeah, maybe." And so they go behind Rockefeller's back, and he loses both contracts. So Rockefeller has kind of cut ties with both railroads, so he's just kind of trucking along, choo-choo. You get the point, not railroads. He builds a pipeline across the country for his oil to go to city, and it be sold, and it cuts his costs in by massive amounts. So he's just basically raking in money hand over fist here, just by building a pipeline. Mid-1900s, Rockefeller, an old man, he hasn't been the chairman of Standard Oil for close to 15 years. When he's called into court to stand trial for bribes, unlawful behavior as a company, and monopoly. He does not pass go, and he does not collect $200. He goes directly to jail. Now, in court, Rockefeller insists that he has no knowledge of any of these behaviors until it suddenly becomes very clear he's lying. He does know what's happening. He knows what the company did, and he's just trying to save his own skin. Long story short, Standard Oil is broken up into 36 tiny companies. Imagine, if you will, a nation with no light. That would be the world without John D Rockefeller. John D Rockefeller created a safe way to distill kerosene to a non-volatile product. It wouldn't burst into flames and burn down your home and kill your family. No. And sure, one day it would become obsolete, but were electric lights not just science ways, not just some sort of attempt to mimic a kerosene lamp, but without having to burn kerosene? Was Andrew Carnegie not driven by sheer competition with John D Rockefeller? Was John D Rockefeller not the man who kept Vanderbilt's head above water when other railroads were closing in? Now, in this world, you can imagine Vanderbilt finds somebody else to fill the contract. But Carnegie would be left without a rival of his stature. He would be left alone with his steel mills in the middle of the country. Carnegie would likely not have done as well. The man was driven by his competition with John D Rockefeller. It's a well-known fact that the two push each other past their brinks in an attempt to make more money than the other. One has to wonder, would Carnegie have ever been subject to the Pinkerton incidents at his striking factories brought on by Mr. Frick? The answer is probably not. Or the dam that burst because Carnegie. Lives would have been saved had Rockefeller never been born, but more lives would have been lost to uneducation and kerosene fires. Now, in becoming a monopoly, John D Rockefeller held a meeting with competitors who owned his oil competition. At the meeting, he said to them, "Look, I understand you may not want to be here today because I am your rival. I am your mortal competition. I am all that stands between you and success. But I am here today to offer you an opportunity to respectfully, with no shame and no loss of respect, to bow out of the competition and exchange your company for a share of Rockefeller stock." Now, I'm sure that somebody in that boardroom called out and said, "Hey, we've worked hard for this. We need more stock." Or something similar. I'm not sure. I wasn't in the boardroom at the time. I was just outside. And so he ended up buying up his competition for shares of Rockefeller stock. Now Rockefeller, despite being kind of a shady businessman sometimes, he really did believe people needed education. He was very pro-education. He founded the General Board of Education. He built hundreds of libraries around the nation to help progress the education of underprivileged children, which is just fantastic. He's A+ for that. You know, we can forget the shady business tactics. And what do you say, John? I went to Juilliard for this. To be a sock puppet wrangler. My life is hell.